Welcome to week 8 of R2 F2 Prognostication. I'm Robbie Russell. Before I get into week 8, I just have to say, last week I made a vow to myself and my viewers to bounce back from that atrocious week 6 that has been probably my worst week since I've done this. And in last week, looking at week 7, I hit pretty good on majority of my predictions. I called both Chargers running backs, Woodhead and Matthews, Eddie Lacy, Riley Cooper, who had a good day receiving, even with Matt Barkley coming into the game. I called Martellus Bennett, who found the end zone from the backup there, Josh McCown. Called Heath Miller, but on the flip side, I did say bench Andy Dalton, who only wants to go and throw for over 340 yards, 350 yards. I said sit Eric Decker. Well, he decides he wants to show up for the best game of the season for him. And then I said start Eli Manning. I don't even want to talk about Eli Manning. That dude's about on the last straw with me. He throws one touchdown pass against one of the worst passing defenses in the league. On primetime television, I don't understand. But anyways, with week 7 now in the books and looking forward to week 8 this week, a week that's featuring 6 teams that are on the bye. Starting with the quarterback, I'm really high on RG3. Now RG3 is going into Denver, coming off of probably his best game of the season so far, where he didn't only throw for 298 yards, but he added 84 yards by his legs on 11 carries. So it just seemed like he was really comfortable. It looked like the RG3 we know from last year. Hopefully he builds on that heading to Denver against the worst pass defense. Now this pass defense of the Broncos is probably going to be without Champ Bailey, as he re-aggravated his left foot. And on top of that, the Broncos are surrendering the most points to quarterbacks over the past 3 weeks. So if you look at this matchup, with no Champ Bailey, it is in Denver, being the worst pass defense, giving up the most points to quarterbacks. RG3 has a favorable matchup that he should take advantage of. Now, and the last thing about that matchup is the Redskins also do not possess a good pass defense, which means Peyton's going to throw all over them. Especially coming off a loss, they're not happy. They're going to look to rebound. So that's going to result in RG3 throwing the ball a lot more. So if you have RG3 on your roster, you have to start him for week number 8. Now, if you unfortunately do not own RG3, other quarterbacks I do like for this week's games are Matthew Stafford, and in that same game, Tony Romo. And speaking of that game, it should allow both offenses to put up good numbers. I like both quarterbacks in that game. Defenses don't possess a big threat against the pass. Michael Vick, who's coming back from injury, and Eli Manning. And as I mentioned, this dude is on my last nerve. I'm going to go with you, Eli, one more week. Okay? I've called him a sleeper and said that he's worth a start 2 of the last 3 weeks. And in those 2 weeks that I called him a sleeper, he has put up 14.5 points and 21.7 points. And again, that's in formats with 20 yards as a point. Passing touchdowns are 4 points and -1 for an interception. So I'm just figuring sooner or later, when I call this dude a sleeper and you have to start him, he's going to light it up, right? I think it's this week. If you don't have one of those 5 quarterbacks I just mentioned, a deep sleeper and one of my gambles this week is Carson Palmer. Now, Palmer gets the Atlanta Falcons this week, and the Falcons have given up an average of 22.23 points to quarterbacks on the road this season, along with ranking second in the most points given up. And in his last 2 games, they've given it up to quarterbacks, by the way. And in Carson Palmer's last 2 games against the Falcons, he has thrown for 353 yards in one game and 412 yards in another game, with a combined 4 touchdowns and only 1 interception. So I really like Carson Palmer this week, who should possibly be available out there on your waiver wire if you don't have one of the top 5 quarterbacks, or if you don't have a Breeze or Aaron Rodgers or Matthew Stafford, or as I mentioned above. Now, not too many quarterbacks that I don't really like this week, but a few is Ben Roethlisberger, Mike Glennon, Andy Dalton, and Geno Smith. I put Andy Dalton on this list last week, and he decides he wants to have almost a career day, but I don't see him doing that again for back-to-back weeks. Running backs that I'm high on week 8, and they have to be started if they're on your roster, is Frank Gore, Marshawn Lynch, Noshawn Moreno, Eddie Lacy, Le'Veon Bell, who's really starting to come along now ever since he's returned from his injury, Pierre Thomas, and Darren Sproles, as these 2 are probably not going to maybe score a touchdown, but they should put up nice yardage nonetheless, which yards is points. Joseph Randle, if DeMarco Murray doesn't play, he was limited participant today in practice, so keep an eye on that if you own Randle or Murray. If Murray starts, I throw him in there for Randle. If it's Randle, well, he's a sleeper already. You got to start him. Alfred Morris in all leagues. They're going to try and change it up with Denver. Denver does have a pretty good rush defense. They're ranked first, but they've given up quite a few rushing scores. And Roy Halou in all PPR leagues. My gamble player of the week, or reach at the running back position, is Lamar Miller of the Miami Dolphins. Now, Miami's going to use both running backs. They're both backs. But if you look back to this past Sunday, Lamar Miller had 9 carries. 9. But on those 9 carries, he ran for 43 yards, which means he averaged over 4.5 yards per carry. But the problem, Lamar Miller has struggled this year, which is why they're starting to work in Daniel Thomas. And Thomas is eating into his carries. Lamar Miller last week had a favorable matchup against Buffalo, did practically next to nothing. Dolphins also had offensive line struggles. They traded for Brian McKinney, left tackle, and that should help the offensive line, and hopefully Miller this week cashes in. A few bench warmers at the running back position that need to stay on the bench this week if you own them is DeAngelo Williams against the Bucks tomorrow night, and the Bucks rank fifth against the run, while they've given up just an average of just 71 yards to starting running backs at home there in Tampa. And they've only given up 1 score as well. If you look back to both games last year against Tampa, DeAngelo Williams did absolutely nothing. So, just bench D-Will, stay away from him. Now, staying in that same game, but going to the other sideline, Mike James, who's going to be filling in for Doug Martin, and he was or will be, depending on your waiver system, is going to be the hot pickup of the week. But this week, he has to stay on the bench. Similar to D-Will, he faces the Panthers tomorrow night on Thursday Night Football. And the Panthers have only given up 2 rushing scores on the season, and they rank 4th against the run. So, but I'd still say add Mike James. The Bucks have a favorable schedule coming up towards the running game after the Panthers. So definitely add him, but don't start him for tomorrow night. Now, other bench candidates are going to include Giovanni Bernard, as I only see him getting his points off of his catches. Zach Stacy, Jacquizz Rodgers, and Steven Jackson if he's playing. Chris Ivory. And I don't expect a big performance from Adrian Peterson. So if you own him, start him, but I don't expect a big day. He squares off against the Packers, who are shockingly 3rd best against the run. And I see the Packers probably stacking the box to take away Peterson and make Ponder throw the ball downfield to beat them. Wide receivers that I'm high on, I like for this week. Marquez Colston. Now, although Colston's last 2 games have been miserable, he does face off against the Buffalo Bills, who have given up the most receiving touchdowns, 15. They've also given up an average of 105 yards per wide receiver number 1. So, obviously, Colston's wide receiver 1 in New Orleans, and giving up 105 yards to number 1 wide receivers, that's good, you know. And that's just on the road. They've given up an average of 33.2 points to wide receivers for the entire season. You know, the Bills have guarded the tight end position really well this season. You know, they've only given up an average of 5 points to tight ends. We don't know if Jimmy Graham's going to play or to what extent, if he does play, how healthy he is. So it's got to be Colston. I expect him to bounce back from the last 2 games here. And start him, and he'll cash in nicely for you. Also, you have to start Anquan Bolden. Harry Douglas, as Roddy White should be back this weekend, and they'll need Roddy too against the Cardinals. Ruben Randall and Hakeem Nicks. And of course, Victor Cruz is a given there. Jared Boykin, Marvin Jones, who's really slowly emerging as possibly the number 2 wide receiver in Cincinnati, and a nice, reliable target for Andy Dalton. Jerome Simpson and Greg Jennings, I like as sleepers this week if you're hurting for a wide receiver 3 or a flex player. You know, Ponder, as I mentioned, is probably going to get the starting nod. You know, Freeman's out. And when Ponder started earlier in the season, Simpson received the most targets on the entire team by 2 over Greg Jennings. They could cash in garbage time. I like either one of those wide receivers. And also look for Larry Fitz to have a nice bounce back week this week as well against Atlanta. A few wide receivers that I don't like, you should be leery of, is Vincent Jackson, even though he's been putting up monster numbers the last 2 weeks. With no Doug Martin, I see Carolina playing the pass a little bit. If V-Jax does go off, get a touchdown, whatever, I believe it's going to come in garbage time, maybe when the game's out of reach in the 4th quarter. And in addition to Vincent Jackson, you got to stay away from Justin Blackmon and Cecil Shorts this week, along with Antonio Brown, Kimbrel Tompkins, Dwayne Bowe, and Mike Wallace. Rolling into the tight ends, I got to start with Tony Gonzalez. Now, Tony had a miserable week last week, only put up 5 points in PPR leagues, 3 catches, 20 yards. But he bounces back. He's going to bounce back against the Cardinals this week. The Cardinals have been absolutely annihilated by the tight ends this year. They're giving up over 15 points to opposing tight ends. Also, you have to start Tyler Eifert, who finally found the end zone there last week in Cincinnati. And I'd even start his counterpart there, Jermaine Gresham. You know, both tight ends are being targeted about even. You really can't go wrong with either. I know I said bench Dalton, but look, they're going to be down. They're going to have to throw the ball. Somebody's going to have to catch a touchdown or 2 besides A.J. Green. Heath Miller, who's second on the team in targets in Pittsburgh since their bye week. And a bit of a reach, if you're hurting for a tight end, is Brandon Pettigrew. The Cowboys have struggled against tight ends this year. They've given up the 2nd most tight end points behind Arizona, as I mentioned. Expect Jason Witten to have a nice bounce-back game after the last 2 weeks have been a disappointment. And that brings me to the defenses to wrap it all up. I like Cincinnati. I like Green Bay. I like New England, San Fran, Seattle, Kansas City, and the Oakland Raiders. So there you have it, Week 8 predictions. Good luck to everybody in Week 8. I'll see y'all back here next week. Until then, I'm Robbie Russell for R2F2 Prognostication. Good luck.